Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast. I'm Ian Irving. On Wednesday, after weeks of speculation, West Ham finally sacked Julen Lopetegui. Coming up, we'll explain why the club decided to part ways after just 8 months and why they've chosen Graham Potter to take over as their new head coach. Okay, joining us for this one in our London studio is David Ornstein, our football correspondent, of course, and also the West Ham writer Roshane Thomas, who has found an interesting room at the London Stadium to record this, Roshane.
Yeah, indeed. Right now, I'm currently where the security guards have their lunch. So I'm the only one here, so it's nice and quiet right now.
Yeah, that's dedication, my friend, just finding a room wherever you can. Let's get into some of the detail of this then, David. I mean, it's been an interesting week for West Ham. It's been an interesting period with Lopetegui in charge. Why was he sacked?
Where to begin? I don't think it was ultimately deemed the right appointment from the beginning. And it's easy to say with hindsight, Ian, but the red flags now appear to have been there throughout. Firstly, he wasn't the top choice, despite what Tim Steidten, the sporting director, said at the news conference to unveil Lopetegui. I guess he had to say that. But, you know, they met with Ruben Amorim, and we don't know their exact list of preferences, but that would indicate that maybe Lopetegui was not in the driver's seat. And not just in terms of West Ham's preference, but also his, because you may remember from the time that Julen Lopetegui was keen on the AC Milan job, and there was protests among the fan base there, and he didn't end up taking it. So that made a convoluted entrance, you know, there were issues reported in pre-season in terms of the intensity of training. They had some very bad results. I think it was over in the USA. They started the season in pretty terrible fashion. They had recruited heavily. It's not clear how much influence he had in some of the signings. Certainly when you look at somebody like Nicholas Füllkrug, signed for almost £30 million at the age of 31. And you go across that recruitment list and you sort of think to yourself, some of these players really need to step it up. Otherwise, it's going to come to be seen as a disastrous spell. You know, the Somervilles of this world, Guilherme, even Kilman, and so on. And then as the weeks and months have progressed with bad results, not the greatest performance level, the style of football, which was one of the main reasons that Lopetegui was appointed, you had fallouts, suggestions of Kudus at half-time, having a row with Lopetegui against Brentford, of Todibo at half-time, having a row with Lopetegui against Arsenal, and so on. What looked like a decent relationship between Lopetegui and Tim Steidten at the beginning, when they were seen talking pitchside before matches, suddenly became very distant, culminating in suggestions that Lopetegui told Tim Steidten to stay away from the training ground. And it kind of became the perfect storm. Nothing was going right. The hierarchy led by David Sullivan were not happy with Lopetegui. And then it was almost death by a thousand cuts, because it was a matter of when rather than if. I got suggestions in December that he was on the brink of being sacked, with Graham Potter very high in the thinking to replace him. And that's ultimately how it's panned out. He had a couple of stays of execution. He got a good result at Newcastle. He stumbled his way through, had a little unbeaten sequence. But ultimately, he's not been given the time that he felt he would need. It's a shame. He's a really nice guy. Great dignity, professionalism, no complaints on that front, but it hasn't worked out. And West Ham very rarely sack managers, or they're reluctant to. I don't think a manager has ever started a season at the beginning of a campaign and been dismissed in the same campaign. If they've started at the beginning of a season, they've always got at least through to the end of that season before being sacked. And that hasn't happened with Lopetegui, which shows that West Ham felt they needed to take drastic measures, with relegation, creeping into the rearview mirror.
Yeah, that's always the thing that tends to push these sort of decisions, isn't it? Just to spell it out, like David was suggesting there, Roshane, just 22 matches in charge for Lopetegui of West Ham. It's the shortest serving manager in their 124-year history. How much of an admission, acting this way, this quickly, is it that they got it wrong in the summer?
Or you said this quickly, it could have been even quicker.
Yeah.
It could have been even quicker, honestly. If one member of the board had it their way, they would have sacked him as early as November. So that tells you how poor he has been in his role as head coach. And, David just touched on, he is a nice guy. He is a nice guy overall. But what do they say about nice guys in general? Finish last. That tends to be the saying about nice guys now.
Not quite last. 14th, it turns out, yeah.
14th. And what I'd compare it to, right? Think about your school days. You have a teacher and everyone takes the lesson serious. You've got to do your homework. You can't be naughty in class or you get detention. And then every so often you get a supply teacher and everyone seems to free lesson. The supply teacher tries to assert authority, but no one takes them seriously. And obviously, that's what I compare it to Lopetegui. He'll try and assert authority, and obviously, it wouldn't go to the way he desired. Only just touched on him clashing with Kudus, for example. Lopetegui clashing with Tadibo during half-time. Got the 5-2 loss against Arsenal, and it was so bad, they had to be separated. So there's a number of cases, and these are the two players. He also clashed with Alphonse Areola, the goalkeeper. So you look at that and you think the whole dressing room dynamic, the whole happiness, it was reaching a point where change had to be made. And my main takeaway was the man of the defeats to the likes of Liverpool, the Chelsea, the Man City.
Yeah.
It's one thing to lose, but the way West Ham would capitulate in those matches were just so bad. And, the fans had voiced their discontent, but the one game where they really was like, enough is enough, was the 3-1 loss against Leicester.
I was at that game as well, and I was shocked at what I was hearing from the away crowd. But I mean, it's understandable considering the results. I mean, he's ended with a record of 9 defeats from that short spell in charge, which obviously is so far below what was expected at West Ham. And actually, David, from the outside, the business that was done in the summer, I think it was 9 first-team players, was it, that came into West Ham. I mean, Lopetegui came with a reputation as a former Real Madrid coach, a Europa League winning coach as well. From the outside, it seemed like this was a really exciting appointment, actually, and an exciting moment with the investment in the team, but it's just not worked out, has it?
Yeah, I don't want to besmirch Lopetegui at all, but when you look at what he's done in the jobs that he's had in terms of the Spain national team, obviously that was pretty disastrous. I remember being out, was it the 2018 World Cup in Russia when it all unravelled, Real Madrid, Sevilla. Has he got as good a track record as some people have suggested? I'm not so sure. He definitely has good attributes, and personality-wise, that's not an insignificant factor. But then the recruitment has come at huge expense. I mean, Roshane will tell me more precisely, but I think it's around £200 million. That's massive. And you've got to deliver on that. Now, this is a failure that has many fathers, because you look at Tim Stuyton as sporting director, you look at the recruitment team around him, you look at the board, the ownership in terms of David Sullivan, of Karen Brady, of everybody involved in this. You can't apportion it to one person. But I don't really understand what the thinking was in some of those recruits. And of course, they tried to get John Duran, which may have been a very canny signing, but they didn't want to go to the level of finance required to prize him from Aston Villa. But then to turn alternatively to Fulkrug raises big questions. You saw somebody like Liverpool in the summer when they wanted to sign a midfielder. They identified Martin Zubimendi. They ended up failing to land him. And they did not turn to an alternative because they didn't feel the right player was there for them. And so far it appears shrewd. They'll probably come back to that position in the future. But West Ham seemed anxious to, bring in bodies. And there was the player that's come in from Real Betis on a free transfer that has gone pretty disastrously wrong. And even some of the more renowned performers have not been excelling at all, and we've seen Kudos drop off this season. There's also been misfortune with injuries to Jared Bowen. That's pretty unavoidable, the nature of his recent injury, and he's such an important player, and he's their captain. Prior to that, you saw them lose Michail Antonio to a horrific car crash, and thank goodness that he's still with us, and hopefully he's going to make a full recovery. So it was an amalgamation of problems stemming from that transfer window, and that's one of the things that's going to need to be put right, because you speak to so many people in football and it's all about recruitment. And so what does the future hold for Tim Stuyton? Because there's been a lot of speculation they may make a change to his role. He brought his brother in to work with him. Suggestions that David Sullivan's going to take a more hands-on approach around recruitment too. It's a perennial question with West Ham, and it's something they need to get right. They're now left with ageing players in many parts of the team on reasonable contracts, long contracts, and that can prove to be a noose around the neck, and it's way below what they would have been expecting. And as is often the case, one person pays the price, and it's the head coach.
Yeah, it's much easier to get rid of a head coach than it is 25 footballers, isn't it? Certainly. So it tends to always be that the head coach that is the change first. Roshane, obviously, we'll get into the detail on Graham Potter and exactly why he's been the choice for West Ham later on in the podcast. But David makes an interesting point there almost about the identity of the club and exactly which direction they want to go in, because this situation with Lopetegui feels very similar to the situation with Manuel Pellegrini just a few seasons ago. And as you wrote in your piece, this was the glamorous, ambitious upgrade on the work done by David Moyes. That was supposed to be the idea internally. So is there something in that West Ham need to get right now moving forward, that they need to know exactly who they are and make the right sort of appointments and the right sort of signings for the type of club they want to be moving forward?
Yeah, for sure. And it's a great point, because as you touched on, whenever the board opted to go in a new direction of a foreign culture hasn't gone to plan. Since they've been in charge for the best part of 14, 15 years now, it's only really Bilic who's been a good foreign coach. All the others have been British managers, whether it's David Moyes, whether it's Sam Allardyce, even before that, Alan Pardew, Alan Kirbishley, Harry Redknapp. So going down the British model, I believe, is what the club should stick to, because they've had more success with it. And in terms of Lopetegui himself, nothing on paper suggested that it would be a good appointment. If you look back at his track record at Wolves in terms of his breakdown relationship with the owners there, disagreeing over potential signings, the fan base turning on him, and not playing an attractive style of football, nothing suggested that it would be a success, because one of the areas that fans got frustrated with Moyes was style of play. They felt like the style of play, which is often sit deep and break on the counter, they got bored of watching that. And when you're watching West Ham this season under Lopetegui rather, it's almost similar. So there wasn't much improvement there. And then just going back to some of the signings, you have to look at someone like a Lewis Guilherme for 25 million, yet to start a league game. As one he touched on, Nicholas Fulkrug, he doesn't represent West Ham's long-term future. He's 31, injury-prone. You're better off signing a younger striker you can build with for the future. Of all the 9 signings, if I'm being really harsh, Wan-Bissaka's been really good, been very solid. Mats Kilman's been solid to a degree as well. Todibo, I like, he's shown signs of promise. And maybe that's it.
You sound like you're clutching already with those 3 in a way.
Yeah. So it's been really tough.
Rosh, didn't Todibo initially want to go to Juventus, and West Ham put the more lucrative financial package together? So although you say he's impressed to an extent, it was almost like you should be bringing in players that really want to be there. And you mentioned that there was tension at halftime of the Arsenal match. That there have been suggestions around Todibo, fair or unfair, about his character for some time, and that maybe had put off some other clubs previously in his career, because he was heavily linked with Manchester United and various others, Tottenham, I think, at one point, and maybe not specifically looking at his performance here, but is that symptomatic of some greater due diligence that needs to go into this recruitment? I think it was Rob Newman who was head of recruitment there with David Moyes and regarded among people I speak to at other clubs as having done a really good job. And if you reflect on that period, it's now starting to look very impressive when Moyes, Newman and Sullivan and others, and maybe now they've hit a more difficult patch.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And just to touch on Rob Newman, him and Moyes' relationship, it dates back to their playing career at Bristol City. So they got on really well, and it was Rob Newman arriving from Man City. In a way, it was a promotion for Rob Newman because at Man City, he mainly worked with the youth team. So it was a promotion for him to work with the first team. And the good thing about Rob Newman was he was behind the scenes. Behind the scenes in a sense where he really wanted to be seen, really wanted to speak well about the signings he made. All the praise goes to David Moyes. And the issue with Tim Steidten is he's been keen to be seen. So examples include before the 3-0 loss against Chelsea, he was interviewed by TNT Sport, I believe. Now, if you compare that to other clubs, rarely will you see someone in a technical director role being interviewed before a match. So that's the first example. The second being during the 4-1 loss, in fact, before the 4-1 loss at Tottenham Hotspur, he was in the tunnel. Now again, why are you in the tunnel? Shouldn't you be in the director's box with all these other directors? Like, why is it a case where you're so keen to be noticed? So there's also that, and that's why in a sense when it was on the Moyes, it was just nice behind the scenes. So when he didn't have to work alongside Tim Steidten, there was a breakdown. Also before matches, it would often be having discussions with Moyes while he's trying to prepare the team. So there's so many factors which went against Steidten, and that's, I guess, a reason why it didn't work out with him and Lopetegui in terms of their relationship. Obviously, I know we're talking about Lopetegui, but I thought it was quite telling today in the press conference that Graham Potter sort of brushed off questions to do with Tim Steidten. He was asked, like, how much you looking forward to working with him, the photo that leaked on Monday, what the conversation like. He didn't really engage much conversation about it. So I thought that was quite telling as well.
Right, let's get into the chaotic week then, as it's been for West Ham, David. I mean, how early in the last 7 days did you think that this change was coming?
I thought the change was coming before Christmas. I remember...
That's a lot earlier than this week.
Yeah, I nearly broke the story one day in December.
That would actually beat everyone else, because there's been a bit of a battle this week to be first on this story, hasn't it? I don't even know if the club had decided and people were reporting this is what's happening, almost forcing their hand.
He was definitely sacked before he was sacked. Sacked by the media. Was
by
never
you
going to
before
report.
Christmas, by the sound of it.
No. Not that he had been sacked, but that the board were meeting to sort of deliberate his future with an expectation that he would be dismissed and Graham Potter very high in the thinking to replace him. As this week unfolded, you've got to be careful in your journalism and reporting, because at certain places you never know until the sort of ink is dry and the official announcement comes out. They can change at any point, and that has happened with West Ham quite a lot. So you apply sort of extra layers of sensitivity. And I think they were a little bit back and forth, which is evidenced by the fact that after reports came that he'd been sacked, he led training, I think, for 2 days, possibly 3.
It's messy, isn't it?
It is. It's a bit unbecoming and lacking in dignity. I don't think West Ham would intentionally have been trying to undermine Lopetegui, who they're fond of. But these situations are never easy, and it's happened at some of the biggest clubs. Manchester United with Erik ten Hag, and they were interviewing people essentially behind his back around the time of the FA Cup final and after. Always a bit awkward. So they'd been talking to Graham Potter for some time, and it's clear that the crux of the conversation had come down to the contract length, with the suggestion that I was getting in December that it would be a deal until the end of the season, a short-term contract, and then you'd see thereafter. Clearly, at this point in the new year, that's something he was not keen to do, and it's ended up as a 2.5-year contract. Having been out of football for 18, 20 months, I don't think Potter, who had turned down a number of opportunities at places like Ajax, he'd been linked with so many positions, was suddenly just going to return for 6 months somewhere, or not even 6 months, really. It's sort of 4 or 5 months now. And when they broke through on that with this 2.5-year deal, I think that's when they decided, okay, we'll pull the trigger on Julen Lopetegui. Not great that he led training on Wednesday and was relieved of his duties afterwards. But it's the way these things do tend to pan out sometimes. I don't think Lopetegui and his representatives are happy about that at all. But this is football. Nothing surprises you. There are some uncomfortable things that go on. And now Potter is in. And I do think that's a really strong appointment, by the way. I don't know if he was the first choice for everyone involved in the decision-making process. We saw the likes of Paulo Fonseca spoken to, of previously Edin Terzic linked, and Sergio Conceição before he went to AC Milan. But Potter is the man. He'll take charge for the Aston Villa FA Cup tie, and hope springs eternal at the London Stadium that he can be the man to lift them back up to better days.
Yeah, in terms of the preparation for that FA Cup third round tie, which is just over 24 hours away as we record now against Aston Villa, this is hardly ideal preparation, Roshane, is it? I mean, why do you think it has taken to this point to make this change ahead of the game? And how do you think David Sullivan's come out of this in terms of the opinion amongst the West Ham support?
Well, in terms of the play itself, mainly due to the negotiations, in terms of Potter wanting a longer deal. He was asked about it in the press conference, but he didn't want to give details in terms of the contract itself, said that's a private matter between me and the club. But certainly that's what he was pushing for. And just to touch on to David's earlier point, I do sympathise for Lopetegui because he's also mourning the loss of his dad from last month as well. He also factor that. So it's been a tough few days for him. And in fairness, he's come out really well because he's mainly a professional. He's just done the job to his best of his ability. So fair credit to him for that. And in terms of David Sullivan, where do we start? In terms of supporters, they've been really frustrated with how he's not him conducting himself, but how the board have been overall the past few days, because it mirrors the 2010-11 season when Avram Grant was under pressure. And finally, after the season when West Ham were relegated. And they wanted to appoint Martin O'Neill as manager. And they were in negotiations. And in the end, Martin O'Neill turned down West Ham because of the leaks. He was fed up with the leaks and thought, you know what? I'm not taking his job. And when negotiations were stalling between Graham Potter and West Ham, I half thought whether he would follow suit, like Martin O'Neill, and think, you know what? I'm going to wait a bit longer, I'll go somewhere else. And in fairness to Graham Potter, today in the press conference, he said, you know what? When I spoke to the board, I felt like it was the right fit. You know, trying to get everyone aligned in what we want to do. We want to challenge for Europe again. And I thought, okay, maybe the length of lengthy discussions were to see if everyone was aligned together. And it just happens to be that they are. But yeah, in terms of David Sullivan, the fans are a bit frustrated of how he's been over the past few days. But look, they're always going to have that sort of relationship between the supporters and the hierarchy, because there's other factors like the stadium, for example. They don't still feel like it's home for them. And then you think about the signings they made, the constant leaks. So there's a number of factors why the fan base have been frustrated with Sullivan and the board.
Yeah, it's not unusual either, is it, for supporters and owners to have a difficult relationship. That you see that across the Premier League, to be fair. Let's look ahead then for West Ham. Next, we're going to take a look at the specifics of what Graham Potter's going to bring. So let's look ahead then. Let's look at what Graham Potter is going to bring to the London Stadium. We're joined in the studio by our athletic football tactics writer, Liam Tharme. Liam, thank you for joining us. And you might have noticed, if you're watching this on video, that Roshane has changed positions. He's left the room where I presume the security guards are now having their lunch to go back into the room where Graham Potter held his press conference earlier. And that's perfect timing, Roshane. How did he come across, do you think, in that room earlier?
Yeah, he spoke well. He spoke for best part, 35 minutes. Spoke about his ambitions for the club, how he wants to overcome his previous disappointment at Chelsea. He referenced if Pep Guardiola has a point to prove, then I guess we all have a point to prove, and how he believes he's a better person, a better coach, probably 20 months out of management, and how he's done stuff in the meantime to try and improve. He wants to bring anyone together, aligned to hopefully challenge for Europe at some point in the future. And he wants to hopefully bring through academy players with the help of Mark Noble. So yeah, he spoke really well.
Yeah, that's good. It's good to set a positive first impression, certainly. Liam, thank you for joining us as well. You've written a lot in recent times about Graham Potter. There was a piece that went up just after Christmas about the coach that he'd become. You said in that, there was a quote from him that you used to say that, it's hard to be a sexy name when you're called Potter. But then when you read the piece, terms like peak end rule, does that still get the tactical juices flowing? Is there still a sexy appointment for West Ham?
I think it can be. The PKM rule is really a concept I sort of nabbed from psychology. I'd read a couple of books and thought it sounded quite interesting, where our memories, how we remember things, are generally the most intense or significant part of it, and how the thing ends. And with Potter, that was really a big run at Brighton that he had. The back end of 2021-22 into 2022-23, that kind of summer where Brighton were excellent. They won 10 times. They beat Manchester United twice in that run. That was including Ten Hag at Old Trafford, and a big, I think it was a 4-0 win at the Amex. They beat Arsenal and Tottenham as well. And of course, you can contrast that to the end of his time at Chelsea, when they lost to Aston Villa and had a bit of a bleak run. After a really strong start at Chelsea, admittedly, and getting through to the Champions League knockout. So there's some ups and downs sort of within it. And I think you can kind of zoom in on whatever part of it you want and kind of take away the narrative you want from it. There's evidence to show that he's really good at taking a club and raising the floor, improving a group of players. There's a whole list of players that came through at Brighton or that were signed and went on to big six clubs now because of him. So he's had more success in terms of actually launching careers than necessarily silverware. But there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic, I think.
Yeah, based on what you've just said and also the articles you've written, the real question is, how well suited is this West Ham squad to what Graham Potter will want to do tactically?
I think it's interesting because one thing he never really did at Brighton specifically was use wingers. He liked his central players an awful lot more. There was a period of time during the run where Brighton were really successful, including the wins over Manchester United. He played Leandro Trossard and Solly March as inverted wing-backs in a back five. And it worked really well because he had the McAllister and Caicedo double pivot. But West Ham, of course, have got real sort of strength out wide, particularly Mohamed Kudus off that wing. Jarrod Bowen too, when he plays off the wing rather than through the middle. They've got the quality of Luka Paquetá as well. But they've played a lot of switches under Lopetegui. They used to switch play a lot under David Moyes too. So whether he sort of leans into that or tries to find a different system, obviously we'll have to wait and see. But I think his ability to improve defences is really important here. West Ham have lost 6 times this season by 3+ goals. So I think when they've been bad, they've been really quite bad. And admittedly, that's been Arsenal, that's been other top teams that have come and really sort of dispatched them and put them away. But that's just too many goals to be conceding, even if the Premier League is quite a goal-heavy league now. So really they need... I'm mindful to use the word pragmatism, but I think one of the biggest strengths of Potter's Brighton were they rarely got blown out the water. They weren't often exciting. They drew quite a lot. They drew 0-0, actually probably more than almost anyone else. But they were quite good at being a bit defensive, if you like, with possession.
David, do you compare this job to the one that he had at Brighton, or do you compare this job to the one that he had at Chelsea? Which one's more similar in your mind?
Chelsea, because Brighton, he arrived from Ostersund's into the perfect setup, very settled environment, great infrastructure on and off the pitch, training ground, stadium, personnel, clarity. It's a fantastic setup down at the Amex and at the training base too, led by Tony Bloom, Paul Barber, now David Weir. Obviously, Dan Ashworth was there at the time. It was a glove fit, and Potter capitalised on that. At Chelsea, it was far less settled, given the arrival of the Todd Boehly Clear Lake Capital ownership. It was somewhat chaotic, and that is understandable to an extent, given the circumstances of the Roman Abramovich era coming to an end. New players coming, new executives, people leaving at various levels. And so you could say a little bit disjointed, and that has comparisons to West Ham. And so okay, Chelsea were at a different level then. Their fans have different levels of expectation. Chelsea, you are demanded to win trophies or at least compete for them, and that's not really the case at West Ham just now, even though they would love to, of course. But just in terms of the environment he walks into, it's much more similar to Chelsea than Brighton. However, when I saw him speaking in his press conference today, he looked far more at ease and comfortable, and less stressed than he did at Chelsea. I remember many of the news conferences. There are just some people who, and I don't say this in any disrespectful way, but they look a little bit out of their depth or uncomfortable when they're in that hot seat. And I felt that throughout with Graham Potter. How do I speak? The scrutiny over how he looks even. There was all this reporting about this glow up that he had at Chelsea, and he changed his clothes and his hair and his beard.
You'd know about that, Orny, yeah?
It's my forte. Not too dissimilar to David Moyes. You may have been there, Ian. I went to his press conferences at Carrington when he got the Man United job, and he was just a little bit less at ease holding court as Manchester United manager. Again, I really like David Moyes, so this is not uncomplimentary. He was more red-faced. He was more. There was more angst. He responded to many more questions with kind of hostility at Manchester United than he did when I spoke to him or was in his presence at Everton, where it just seemed his domain. And today, when I watched some of his answers on TV, Graham Potter, it looked like he was more back in his domain, like he was at Brighton and wasn't at Chelsea. But just in terms of the pressure that will be on him, I think there's a greater comparison to Chelsea than to Brighton.
He spoke about being balanced, Graham Potter, in the press conference, and the fact that he's arrived mid-season as well. What effect do you think that's going to have on him putting his philosophy across to this group of players?
Yeah, it's difficult. You've got to sort of not see out the season, but you've got to win games and get points. I think one of the biggest tests for him is after the Villa game in the Cup, he's got 5 London derbies and 6 Premier League games to start off with.
That's intense.
He didn't deal with London derbies particularly well at Chelsea. They weren't great. Again, they've often been tight games. And one of the only real critiques from his time at Brighton is he never beat Palace in a rivalry there either, which is sort of small compared to all the progress that he did have. But often he was really good at making a team effective, strong, cohesive, adaptable most of the time. I think it was easy to then say, sort of not nasty enough or sort of too nice, but I think they just weren't often clinical enough sort of in both boxes and were often better between both boxes. So I think that's a real test for him as much as West Ham, because West Ham haven't been phenomenal in those games either, particularly when they've played sort of Chelsea, Arsenal, Spurs, big teams, especially I think Spurs this season really blew them away at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. So that I think for Potter as much as West Ham is huge as a starting point of a schedule.
Roshane, final point on the podcast. How do you think West Ham fans are going to receive this appointment?
The reaction on social media has been really good. The reaction on the West Ham forums that I read regularly has been really good as well. It's just the hope that he can replicate something similar to what David Moyes achieved. In Graham Potter's interview with the club's in-house media, he said, "You don't win a European trophy by fluke. There's a good bedrock at the club, and it's important that we build on from it." And just to add on to what Liam said, Graham Potter said one of the first priorities he wants to do as head coach is to improve the defence, because the defence has been very porous this season. They conceded 39 goals, which is the 3rd highest in the league. And I believe West Ham conceded 3 or more goals 8 times this season. So that's definitely an area he has to work on for sure. But look, the signs are there. That'll be a really good appointment, and hopefully he can replicate something similar to what Moyes achieved.
Yeah, the defence certainly sounds like a day one problem, doesn't it, when you put it in those terms. Roshane, Liam, David, thank you all of you for being with us on the Athletic FC podcast. Needless to say, there's loads of brilliant writing on the decision to appoint Graham Potter for West Ham on the Athletic right now. There's also, of course, with the January transfer window being open, our live blog on the transfers that are happening in this window, and Adam Leventhal will be back here tomorrow with a weekend preview as the FA Cup 3rd round plays out. Thanks for your company, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.